If you have ever wondered how much protein, how many carbs and fats you should be eating as an endurance athlete, today's episode is for you. I'm going to sit down with Dara Richmond, who we've had on the podcast before. She is a physical therapist, a coach, and a personal trainer. She's fantastic. We're going to talk about macronutrients. Thank you so much for being here today. Last time you were on, we talked about strength training, and today I'd love to chat with you about macronutrients and what roles those play for us as endurance athletes. And for anybody who's listening who hasn't taken science class or nutrition classes in a long time, macronutrients are proteins, carbs, fats. So can we start there and just give us a quick overview of what roles those play for us specifically as endurance athletes?
Yeah. So, it all kind of goes hand in hand. And I love the strength training stuff because that's just my jam, even though, I'm a cyclist and endurance athlete first and foremost. But I always think that the nutrition part is where people get a little bit whoa, oh, I never learned this. Oh my God. And it's weird. We never are taught this in school. I was talking to another client about it. I'm like, that's weird that we just don't really get that much nutrition education. Your macros are really just your carbs, your fats, your proteins. If that's pretty simple, most people understand what that means. Yes, you need all of them. Can you survive off of very, very low carbs and almost no carbs? You absolutely can. Is it suggested as an endurance athlete? Absolutely not. Despite what some people may tell you. But the reality is we need all of them. Because we're not just endurance athletes. We're humans that want to live long, healthy lives. And so I always have to remind people whatever your level, whether you're a beginner or a professional athlete, and I work with everyone and anyone in between, you need all of them. And also that we're all different, and part of my whole thing is, with educating people is that what works for me may not work for you. There's a million different diets and ways of eating and things that work for one person that may not work for the other. And there's very few that I'm just that's just straight up bad. But there's also, you have to have some of that flexibility and understand. I took a nutrition course and they use the term bioindividuality, and it really means that we're all different. We're all built differently. And so, being plant-based, I'm a mostly plant-based athlete myself, but that doesn't work for a lot of the people that I work with. And I'm not going to try to force it down their throats and other people something else, so you need carbohydrate for fuel as a primary source. And that's something that you're going to have people say differently, and people who are low carb, this and that. But ultimately, as endurance athletes, my primary thing is don't be scared of carbs. You need them, but just the more you are educated, the more you can make better decisions. And there's less emotion tied to food. It's more about being healthy and understand. And the more you understand, I think, at least for myself, the less it's stressful. And that's my goal, is to make food not oh my God, it's not about being good or bad. It's just educating, understanding, and then fueling, and the words that you use, and not depriving yourself and feeling guilty about guilty this, guilty that's that's not my thing,
Right. So you mentioned everybody is different. How do you go about finding out what works best for you?
Well, so as someone who's done the health coaching, I've done multiple courses. I just love this stuff. I spent thousands of dollars on the education because I like it. I'm fascinated by it. I love nutrition. I like science. So there's the idea of bioindividuality, meaning that everyone's built differently. You're different than me, and where, your genetic makeup and your hormones and the foods that you eat and your sensitivities is different. And so for me, as someone who's done a lot of the nutrition side and the health coaching side, I come to everything from an objective, scientific background, because that's just kind of how I function. I'm a numbers gal.
Yeah.
But then within that, you have to see what's working. Right. And so when I'm working with someone like a client, whether it's, and it's mostly sports related stuff, they want to lean up, and, that's kind of why I made my little meal plans and whatever, is people who are athletes, and they're not trying to just starve themselves. And you have to come with everything from a foundation of knowledge and education. And from there, then you have to see what works and see what doesn't. And whether you hire me as a nutrition coach or whether you do this on your own, as long as you have a good like foundation to start from and you can just track things, write things down, keep tabs on it, you'll see what's working and what isn't working, right? So even if whatever meal plan you're on or whatever thing you're following, if you take pretty good notes and just kind of note how you feel and crunch some numbers, you'll figure out what's working and what isn't, right? For everybody, I mean, the first thing that I do is if they really have specific goals, is I want to know what their goals are. Like, are you trying to just lose, change your body composition, meaning body fat percentage? Are we trying to get that lower, higher? Are we trying to gain muscle mass? Like, I need to know what someone's goals are first. And then I need to know their activity level. And then I do the numbers and I really look at like, what is that person's, there's basic numbers. And I outline this when I coach people privately, but also just in my plans and stuff, is like, understand like what your metabolic rate is, understand some basic things. And it's just plugging in numbers. And then once you understand that, seeing what foods you eat and ways that you can eat healthier and make better choices based on things you're already eating. And so everyone's different. Everyone's numbers are going to be different. My resting metabolic rate, meaning how many calories I burn just doing nothing, just being a human, is going to be totally different than yours. And there's ways to figure it out. Like, I give people online calculators. You could Google it yourself. You could figure it out. And then from there, at least you have some numbers to start with. And it doesn't mean you need to be like staring at numbers all day and stressing yourself out. Like, oh my God, did I hit 1,500 calories?
Yeah.
But I am, at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie, and so I don't want people to stress about it, but I want them to be educated at the very least. Like, hey, if your resting metabolic rate right now is 1,500 calories per day and you're consuming 3,000 and you're not exercising at all, like the numbers don't add up. It's calories in, calories out, right? So you got to kind of understand some basic numbers. Now, for a lot of people, and for endurance athletes, it's sometimes the opposite.
Yeah.
They're exercising for 5 hours or 4 hours and they're just not eating enough.
Right.
And I'm like, hey, dude, like you got like, for athletes that I work with that I want to perform really well in racing, I'm telling them to eat more carbs. Like I'm trying to shove carbs down their throat every freaking chance I get, because that is going to be used instantly. It's going to make them faster. It's a quick energy source. So it depends on the person, it depends on the need, it depends on the time, it depends on the day. But it really, it's not, my goal is to make it not super complicated and to not make people like freak out when they hear me talk about the numbers. Like, oh my God, I don't want to track my calories. I'm like, it's not that stressful. My goal is to make it not stressful. And there's no, like, I don't want to have any like emotion tied to it. Like, you're not bad if you ate more and you're not bad if you did whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah, but I see both sides. So just like as a thing, like I get people who are under fueling, way low on their calories, and people who are way over. And I'm like, dude, you didn't even do any exercise that day. Like,
right.
Do the math, so.
Does it all average out though? Like, so say I one day do a lot of exercise, but I'm not eating enough that day and I have a deficit, and the next day I eat more and I have a rest day. Is that okay? Or do we really need to be making it more specific to the single days?
Yes and no. I will say in the bigger picture, absolutely. So when people are like, oh my God, and then on the weekends, I just don't even care, whatever. I'm like, my goal, depending on someone's goal, actually depending on anyone's goal, is to the bigger picture. And if I can get that person eating relatively well and understanding what they're eating for 4 to 5 days a week, I don't care if you totally mess up the other 2 days. I don't care if you eat like 12 pizzas the other days. What really matters is, like you said, the bigger picture, things are correlating and you're getting enough fuel and, or you're not completely like going crazy all those days. But I will say, to get a little bit more specific, and I talk about this in my online programs and stuff. And I actually have I think I have some like YouTube videos as well, that I try to get people to start to figure out, like, to look at a whole week. And you're like, okay, well, this day I didn't eat that much and this day I ate more. Well, that's totally fine. But like, try to have it match your work that day. Right. So if you one day didn't eat a lot, well, maybe try to make that a day where you didn't really exercise a lot. Right. And then if one day you ate a ton, well, great. Make it a day when you rode your bike for 3 hours. Then it all evens itself out. Right. So yeah, every day doesn't have, and in fact, when I'm working with people, every day is not the same. I'm very specific on like, hey, on this day, you need to eat a ton because you are an endurance athlete. Like, I absolutely need you to be above your resting metabolic rate. Whereas on another day, if that's that person's rest day, or if that person, like I know, is going to be in an off season and not really training or riding at all, cut calories that day.
Right.
You're just sitting at the computer all day. Like, I don't know, and then there's part of it is also just having people being a little bit more listening to their body. I think we're so out of touch with our bodies these days. Like, I'm going to give you a number, but ultimately, if you're hungry, eat, right? Like, don't starve yourself.
Yeah.
And then on the other flip side, I have people who are like, oh, well, I was like below my calories all these days. Can I eat more on this day? And I'm like, you can, but if you're not hungry, don't eat it. Right? Like, if that person's goal is fat loss, like specifically they need to lose 3% body fat. Yeah. If I tell them it's a day where they can get more than that or double that because it's a workout day, it doesn't mean you have to eat 2,500 calories. It just means that it's available to you. Like, see how your body feels.
Yeah.
In
addition to counting calories, do you recommend people are tracking their macronutrients?
So I take there's a couple different approaches. And I think for a lot of people, I don't really have them track their calories because it becomes stressful. If someone has a very specific goal, like I want to lose 10% body fat, or usually they'll say something like, I need to lose 30 pounds. And I'm like, okay, well, let's take a step back and look at it more like a body fat percentage.
Yeah.
That tells me more than the numbers on the scale. And so I'll say, okay, well, that maybe, 10% body fat, whatever. Because they may have cardiovascular disease. I'm like, well, you're at risk of getting a heart attack. So let's do this. But oftentimes what I tell people, and it stresses them out less, and it often becomes easier for them to look at, is instead of just focusing on the calories, because that can kind of stress people out. Mm-hmm. And this is just how I work. I tend to start off by having people just look at protein first, and don't worry about the calories. Like, don't worry about the calories. And I almost don't even worry about the macros. Like, I'll get very specific with some people, and I'll be like, 40% should be protein and 30% Mm-hmm. To make it the most easy to start, and this is what I would suggest to anybody listening, especially if they're doing this on their own, is just start to look at protein first and just look at and don't track every day. Even people that I'm coaching nutrition monthly, I don't have them track every day because it's stressful and they don't have time. No one has time for that. Like, I don't even have time for that. I don't care. If you can do a couple days a week, 2 to 3 days a week, and that's usually what I ask of people that I'm working with privately. I'll say, give me 2 to 3 days a week. Either you write it down or you use an app. Like, I use MyFitnessPal. It's free. You can track things in there for free. I love it. I'll link it when I email you some other stuff. Look at your protein. Just start with that first and look at how much protein you're getting in per day, and try to get, for most people, it's usually I'm telling them to get more protein. And if you do that and you really start to look at that first, the more protein you take in, the more full you end up getting. And it actually ends up working and solving multiple problems. So if people focus on that and they're just like, oh yeah, I need about 130 grams of protein, and they're like, oh my God, I'm not getting enough protein. And if they get more protein, they just tend to eat less junk. Mm-hmm. And they tend to feel more full. And the third reason why I look at protein is when you eat more protein has more of a thermogenic effect, meaning you burn more calories by having to break down protein. So protein itself takes more energy to break down your body to break it down. So, and you need it more for building muscle, right? And the more muscle you have, the more calories your body's just burning at rest, and you protect your bones, So I usually say start with protein. Just look at that, right? I have a couple of handouts that are just free handouts, and it just kind of gives people guidelines and things. And protein, at its simplest, and for endurance athletes, the numbers actually are higher than most people just because of how much you exercise and how much you're literally eating away at your muscle. Most people, if they're trying to start with just protein, I'll say start off by, this is very generalized, your weight in pounds. So whatever you weigh in pounds, I'm like 100, I'm tiny. I'm like 5'1". I'm like 100 pounds. So your weight in pounds is a good place to start with how many grams of protein you should be eating every day. So that's just one place to start. So if you figure out how much you weigh, most people know how much they weigh in pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are like, I don't know, 150 pounds or whatever. That's approximately, and the numbers change depending on a lot of things. That's approximately how many grams of protein you should be getting every day. Now, if you really track, like I said, with people that I work with, I'm like, hey, I need 3 days a week of you tracking it for like the first month. I'll usually make them do 2 to 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Most people are not getting that.
Right.
So if they increase the protein to what that number really should be, they end up just getting more full. They feel better. They feel more recovered because they're actually feeding their muscles with like things that your body needs. And it doesn't mean don't eat carbs at all. It just means get more protein in.
Yeah.
And what most people end up doing is they just end up eating less crap, because they're full. They're not snacking on something that's like adding absolutely nothing to their, so if I had to give my like quick tip of the day, it'd be probably like start with protein.
Yeah.
And
I've
then
always been surprised in the past when I start tracking how much protein I'm eating. It's like never enough. And I always have to do these like resets, like, okay, now we're going to start trying to eat enough protein again. For women who start following this and paying attention, and they realize I'm not eating enough protein in a day, what like kind of like go-to foods or like go-to meals or snacks do you recommend to get enough protein in a day?
Well, and it depends on the person. So like I'm mostly a plant-based, person. So it's hard when you're vegan and plant-based. I mean, you'd have to eat like veggies have protein in them. I think some people don't even realize that. Oh, kale has protein in it.
Right.
Whoa. Guess what? You'd have to eat a bucket full of kale, like buckets, to get enough protein. So for me and for other like vegan athletes, you're going to have to take protein shakes in. Because otherwise you're going to be eating so much fiber, your stomach's going to get upset if it was just veggies, or if you were just to do nuts, that's so high calorie, then your calories are going to go through the roof. And like, like ultimately, if you ate like 2 pounds of nuts, I don't think that's going to be great either. So nuts, you can get protein from plant-based sources. It's hard. Tofu is another one. Tempeh for plant-based athletes, and then protein like whey is for non-vegan, and then for vegan, like a pea protein and things like that. For people who aren't vegan, much easier. Red meat, man, you're gonna get a ton of protein from that. And then chicken, right? Chicken, fish, shrimp. If we're looking at meat sources, any of those, like, and then egg whites and whey protein, again, like you're gonna get a scoop of whey protein. Like if you make a protein shake every day, that's 20 to 30 grams of protein you can get very quickly. So I go the protein shake route as like one meal, because most people, like you've noticed, like, man, it's really hard. If you're an endurance athlete, it's going to be hard to get that every day. And you will notice a difference. And whether it's your recovery is limited, whether you're just getting like skinny is not the goal. Like when my programs say lean athlete, that doesn't mean skinny. It means you are lean, but you're strong.
Yeah.
You maintain that muscle mass. And that's the hard part, is people are like, how do I do that? And I'm like, yeah, it's hard. Work. It means you have to actually like look at some numbers. But chicken breast is an easy one for people who eat meat because it's lean, right? It's one of the leaner ones, so it's lower calorie. Chicken breast, protein, whey, egg whites, eggs, getting into some dairy, cottage cheese, yogurts, a lot of yogurt. You can get really like low calorie, but high protein content. I have a couple, I think I have a PDF handout that lists that. I think I have 2 PDF handouts. I think I have one that lists protein sources, I usually break things down into 20 to 30 grams of protein because your body can't really take in more than that per meal. So someone who's dumping if you're dumping 10 scoops of protein, then you're going to do it for the day. It's not going to work. That's not how things work. You have to spread things out, and to really take in protein, you need to kind of wait about 2 hours between meals. So FYI, if you're getting in 80 grams of protein in one sitting, you're not actually taking all that in. But I think I have a handout that has a thing on sources of protein that are about 20 grams each. And then I have another one that with carbs, healthy carbs. I don't even remember all of them, but it's common sense stuff, a lot of it. It's just good to have the numbers, I think, because people just, the more you look at it, the more you just I think the more I can teach people the numbers in a non-stressful way, it just becomes a part of your subconscious. You just start to you'll just make better choices.
Yeah.
I think.
We've talked a lot about protein. What about carbs? How should we be incorporating those into our day?
Yeah. So I do, I have a couple videos. They're not available on YouTube or anything. I think they're in mostly in my plans, but I'm happy to share some of my little tidbits. Carbs, you absolutely need carbs. And so to me, I look at carbs as during workouts as fuel, 100% fuel. Because the more you can take in during aerobic workouts. So I'm talking about aerobic stuff. Strength training, it's a little bit less important. However, it will still help you, right? So CrossFit athletes and people who are doing really intense strength training, carbs are still going to help you. Carbs are fuel. Absolutely. And so I want people to love carbs, understand carbs. And I tend to, especially for athletes who are hey, I want to do well. Yeah, maybe I need to lose 5 or 10 pounds. I usually get that. That's the person that's they're training hard, but they're I train all the time and I can't really figure this out. And I feel I don't understand nutrition. I'm well, you need carbs. So during your workouts, take them in, understand how much. And I look at carbs the same way I look at protein, grams of carbohydrate per hour, right? So some people, I'm telling them to eat more carbs during their workouts. Now, the rest of the time, if they're just sitting around at the computer all day, I don't know that they need all those carbs. So for me, that's I talk about this a little bit more in depth in some of my programs, but it's the idea of some days you're going to have more and some days you're going to have less. And for me, if I need them to get in all that fuel, I'm going to probably have them get in a lot of carbohydrates. It's kind of close to when they're doing their workouts, because then they'll use it. Right. And it's, you need carbs. Otherwise you feel horrible. You won't, the thing is, people think they can go low carb, and you totally can, but your top end power is going to suffer. There's no way around it. I'm sorry, I'm going to eat all the shot blocks and all the quick glycemic sugary things when I'm working out, because that is absolutely going to power your body and muscle and use that muscle glycogen for energy and fuel and power. So don't not eat carbs when you're working out. That's makes zero sense. You're never going to be as powerful as somebody who's eating more carbs. There's just no way around it. Look at the research. That's what it is. But then there's other times where people are just kind of going to carb heavy meals. And yeah, if you're not using those carbohydrates, they are just empty calories, and that is going to turn into body fat.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't need to eat a ton of shot blocks because you're just sitting at your desk all day, then that's a bunch of calories that you're absolutely not using for energy source. So
what's your threshold for when we should start adding in carbs on the bike? I assume if we're just going out to the trainer for an hour, don't need to worry about it.
If it's under an hour, I think people have been scared away of the idea oh my God, you can't be I get this intermittent fasting people are oh, don't be fasted, it's going to kill you. It's not going to kill you. It's just you won't perform as well. If it's less than an hour, I don't know, have a good breakfast. You have enough muscle glycogen stores to fuel your body for an hour's worth of work. So does that mean you should do that? I don't know. Everyone's different. Like I said, some people can ride for an hour and not eat anything. Great. Do that. Depends on the effort. If it's a crit rate, going as hard as possible, I would still have some quick energy source right before race, like a goo, a shot block, bam, right? 45 minutes, your body's burning through a lot of stuff. But I look at it again from the numbers perspective. I have athletes who are doing 3 to 4 hour rides and races, and I'm telling them to get in more carbs, like start off with a meal. And again, it depends on your window of time. Like the more complex you make a carb, the longer it's going to take to digest. So if you have 3 hours before your ride, eat a hearty, healthy meal, eggs, scrambled toast, avocado, because you have plenty of time to digest that, right? And if you don't have that time, then you might want to do a banana, and something that's a quicker source, and a toast and something that's like easier to digest an hour before. But it depends on the length and duration, but like, yeah, carbs. I do have a carb tips like PDF handout, and I think it says, just to summarize it quickly, I usually tend to suggest people to get in like 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour for a longer cardio workout.
Okay. Do you recommend a certain kind of carb, or are they all created equal on the bike? What can we absorb more quickly and easily?
Of course, I've completely forgotten that if it's like fructose, there's different carbs that work better together synergistically. And I think it's fructose. Luke, I forget doing them together, but a lot of people will get their carbs in their drink mix because they just need to get more in. Because ultimately you can't eat like 100 shot blocks in an hour. Like you'll just be ill because you need to take a lot of water with them.
Right.
But most of those drinks have different sources of like a quick sugar that'll get into your system better. And it's just about getting that into your system as quickly as possible. That's really why you want to do different types of I think it's fruit. I have to look it up again. I wrote it down. I forgot. But a lot of the pre-made mixes that you can put in your drink, something that's super dense is just going to take too long. Like when you're on the bike, that's absolutely the time you want something that's where I think it gets confusing, is people are like, oh, I don't want a high glycemic sugar because I'm going to get diabetes. And I'm like, no, dude, when you're on the bike, you're burning it instantly. So you need it instantly. When you're not on the cardio and not on the bike, not on the run, yeah, you don't need to eat shot blocks. There's no reason for that, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm saying shot blocks, but just because I'm thinking of something that's a very high glycemic, like literally the second it takes no time for your body to break it down and use it as energy. And people don't understand that concept, that like you want a simple sugar when you're exercising because it's so much easier to turn it into energy for your body, right? Now, when you're not exercising, yeah, you don't need a bunch of like red vines and sugary stuff. Now, like every now and then, if you want to enjoy it, great. I do too. But that's not the point of it then. So understanding like a more complex carb, and that could just be like whole wheat bread or whatever, something that's denser and heartier versus like something that's very, very quick. And that's why people take those gels and those shot blocks and they have the drink mix, because those sugars instantly hit you. And if you've ever bonked, because like you instantly like feel like rejuvenated.
Yeah,
like, oh,
right.
Or Coca-Cola, right? That's why people love the Coca-Cola. It's like instantly it's getting into you're re-energized. It's not just magical, like it's just sugar.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's really just understanding, and some of it's trial and error, and some of it's like if I have an athlete who is really training hard, like a lot of triathletes especially, you have to train your body to take in more carb, because if you just start taking in a bunch of carbohydrate, you might just feel sick. And so if you look at the professional triathletes, like trying to think of a couple ones, like Holly Lawrence is a pro triathlete, Gwen Jorgensen, there's a couple of them, and they'll literally do like these protocols where they train their gut so that they can take in as much carbs as possible.
Right.
Especially while they're on the bike, because they're not jumping around as much. And so they get really, really, really like high carbs. They get all this like stored energy. And so they're feeling like super strong on the bike, and then they can hold that for the run. And that's true for ultra runners, ultra marathoners, gravel races are freaking forever.
Right.
So it's to your benefit to know, like, But then on the flip side of it, you're like, oh my God, I'm going to have so many carbs. I'm going to get, I'm going to gain weight, da, 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 da. It's like, well, you're not doing those 5-hour rides every day. So if you're not doing a 5-hour ride that day, don't eat all that stuff,
Right. At what point do you recommend adding in proteins? Like I asked this as a bike packer, right? Like I'll go out and bike for 20 hours in a day. And at some point I can no longer rely on just carbs. At what point do you have to add those proteins in?
Yeah, I mean, if you just do carbs, you're gonna bonk. Like, and ultimately, like you need like something to sustain you for the like longer, like slow burning stuff, like fats and proteins and stuff. And your body will use those as energy sources. So like you can survive just like on the keto and just doing it takes so much work for your body to break down fat and protein to use as fuel. So it's not efficient for a short distance person. For a long distance person like you, bike packing, multi-day stage events, randoner people. I mean, I see everybody, and whatever. Like, yeah, you should have some peanut butter and some fats and some proteins and like, a PB&J with some banana in it. I mean, it kind of depends on the person. It depends on what you're like. Also, it depends on what your stomach tolerates. Like, but yeah, if you're a couple hours in, or if you have many hours to go, yeah, you're gonna need more fats and some people like those like rice balls. Do you ever make the scratch? Like those cakes, things like that, because you can stuff like bacon. Like, I mean, I think people are just doing it because it tastes great too. But like bacon and cheese, and if you're out there for hours, I usually just make a sandwich, but I've done the rice ball thing before too, and like shove things. I mean, rice is nice. The reason why people like those is because like it's very compact. The rice is the carbs, right? So it's easy to digest a white rice, very, very easily digestible. But then you can shove a bunch of stuff in there to get like the fats and the proteins in.
Yeah.
Right? And they hold, and they won't get all weird on you. You put them in a Ziploc bag. But yeah, like I mean, it depends on the event, but like anybody that's endurance based, couple hours in should be eating something and then realizing it's going to take a while for your body to digest that, but you've got a couple hours to go. So, you have all the time in the world.
What about post-ride recovery? I think that's where a lot of people just get off the bike and then they don't think about eating anymore. What do you recommend for doing when you get off the bike?
Yeah. And I think that's like, when I'm finishing, I'm a big protein shake person. And I get a lot of my clients that are like, oh, I don't like processed this and processed that. I'm like, that's fine. You can make your own protein. I mean, I'll teach you how to make it, whatever, you make your own. But the second, I mean, I tend to buy a lot of those pre-made ones just so I can store them anywhere, because the second I'm off the bike, or if it's a longer workout, if it's under an hour, I'm not worried. Right. Just get it in the day. It's not going to make a huge dent in your training either way. But if it's a long thing, especially because I'm one of those people that's never hungry really right after. Like I'm not one of those starving people. I'm just like, that can blunt some people's sense of satiety. So if you're that person like me, where you're like, I'm not really that hungry, I actually feel like not hungry, I will have a protein shake and just force it down. But I like the vanilla shakes that I get, like the Orgain shakes. There's this idea of like right after your workout, you want to get in this 30-minute window because that's going to help with recovery the most. So a lot of people have heard this or been told that, and there's value to that in the sense that after you do an intense exercise bout, there is a window of time where if you get in protein after your workout, you will get it into the muscles and it will improve that muscle synthesis, muscle regrowth more quickly if you get it in within a shorter amount of time. Because there's a period of time where everything's open and ready. Man, you just did this big workout. Your body's ready to absorb stuff. So there's value in, and that's why I do the shakes, is because I want to optimize that window. I'm like, 30 to 60 minutes. I mean, I'm going to get every little iota of muscle back that I can and get stronger. That's really get stronger and more muscle. The reality is that if you really look at the research, it doesn't really matter that much. As long as you're getting in, like I said at the beginning, the grams of protein per day. Like if you get in the full day, you're still going to be okay. Even if after the ride you were like farting around and taking care of your kids or feeding your dog or whatever, as long as you got it in that day, you're still going to be okay. But the caveat to that is it matters more if you're doing high intensity work, and it matters more if you're doing a lot of strength training.
Yeah.
It's more important for those people. So if I have me personally, if I do a strength training day, because I love my strength training. If I do a heavy lifting day, that's the day where I care. And this is what I tell my people too, if I'm working with them. That's the day that I care more about right after my workout. I have one of those pre-made shakes.
Yeah.
And I'm like on it within 30 to 60 minutes. Whereas if it's another day where I'm just kind of like riding around, like tootling around even if it's 2 to 3 hours, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to eat something, but I'm not really as stressed out about it because the intensity level is lower. It's not about like a really heavy lift day. It's not about a plyometric, interval, crazy hard bike climby interval day. So I care, but I don't care. But I would say if you're one of those people that just doesn't eat enough, which is a lot of people, like they're just not getting enough fuel in. I like to just nag on people because at least it just becomes a habit. Like the protein shake thing, I will often just tell people, just do it after your workout, because I would rather them just get used to the habit of doing it than forget, because some people just aren't eating enough. They literally just aren't. And the problem is, if you aren't eating enough, not only are you losing muscle mass, but you're killing your metabolism. So especially females, like it's real. If you don't eat enough, body creates a new resting metabolic rate that's really low. So it now thinks that you only need 1,000 calories to survive. And then the problem is if you eat above that, it's just going to turn into fat. So you've screwed yourself over by not eating.
Yeah.
So unfortunately that happens, especially with the perimenopausal women and pre and post, because they're so wigged out. Like, oh my God, my body's just going crazy. My hormone metabolism is slowed. So they just start eating less. And I'm like, yo, you're killing your metabolism. And now your body thinks you only need no calories. And so then anytime you eat more, because you're freaking starving, your body's like, oh, you don't need that. That's just fat. We don't need that. So it's
how do you break out of that cycle then?
Carefully. And unfortunately, a lot of times I'm like, you're just gonna need to hire me or hire somebody, because the problem is if you just eat more calories, it's just going to turn into fat. I'm not like, it's just going to turn into fat because your body has now created a new resting metabolic rate. So I'm just kidding. You don't need to just hire me, but really the way to do it is carefully. You have to slowly increase your metabolism back up. And that's not easy, right? It means like really figuring out like how to get things back up. And I will say, my opinion is, if you do that slowly, you also want to increase some of like the strength training so that you can gain more muscle mass. Because the problem is if you just increase the calories, you're just going to get fat. Literally, it's just turning into fat. So if you increase the calories and then you add strength training, you're going to increase your muscle mass. Well, now your muscle mass is going to burn more calories at rest. So that will bring your resting metabolic rate back up. So that goes back to my first talk with you about do strength training.
Yeah.
Right? There's no easy answer. I mean, it's tough. If you've deprived your body for a long, and this is men as well. I have male cyclists who are not eating anything because they want to be skinny and better climbers. And I'm like, dude, that's not the answer. You need to eat.
Yeah.
But that it all goes back to everything still comes back full circle. Look at your protein, get more protein in, right? Like it all makes sense, right? It's not I'm not saying it's easy. None of it's easy. You have to keep tabs on it. You have to track some things. You have to be more mindful of some things. Some days you're going to have to be like, oh, I'm going to eat less this day. Some days I'm going to eat more this day. But ultimately, yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the hardest things that I find is like the group of women. And I'm in that group myself. So I understand it. That's me. If you don't eat enough, your body's smart. You can't just eat less. That's not, you can't eat less and then exercise more, especially the cardio. Man, if you just eat less and then do more cardio, your body's going to freak out, totally freak out, and not in a good way.
This is, I think, the biggest thing. I just know so many women who
All
like
of them.
really, really hard and try and survive on like 1,500 calories a day. And it's just not good.
Now, that being said, if I'm working with somebody and they're telling me the goal, they want to lose 5% body fat, there's going to be days where I'm like, yeah, you are going to be at 1,500 calories. You're going to be at 1,200 calories. But the other days, you're totally not going to be at that.
Yeah.
No sense. You're going to die. There's no freaking way you're going to be able to do your bike rides. Like, it's just stupid, you know, like I can say that, but like, obviously, like, you know, it's emotional, like it's stressful. Like there's so many body image, like, you know, you're bombarded with this stuff every freaking day. And like, you want to be faster. And now you're feeling like, what the hell? Like how did I just gain 10 pounds overnight? Like, it's real.
Right.
Like, hormones are real. Like,
this
is real answers for this. It's not like in your head. It's science. Like I try to just come at things from a very like, I don't know, maybe I'm just brutally honest. That's just the way that I function. But I try to make it as unemotional as possible so people don't stress. Like, take the emotion out of it. Take a step back. Just look at the numbers and focus on the things that you can focus on. And that usually works for people, right? Because it's not about starving yourself, because then you're just going to get stressed out, and then you're going to, and no one can maintain that. And then they freak out, and then they eat a ton, and then they feel guilty, and then they go back to starving themselves. And it's like, and I've done it myself, so I understand. But that's not, that's not how I operate, you know? Yeah, it's tough.
What about fat? We haven't talked about fat yet. How should we be incorporating fat into our diet?
Yeah. I mean, if you really look at it from a physiological perspective, your body can survive with proteins and fats, and you don't need carbs. You really don't need carbs at all. You absolutely need fats. You need fats and proteins, your brain, your hormones, your organs, your everything. So fats are great, right? And, you know, there's something to be said for, you know, moderation of everything. But, you know, some of those omegas and other fats, like, yeah, you want your eyes and your heart and your brain and your everything to be functioning well. And you can use fat as fuel, right? So fat will break down and be used as an energy source. It just takes longer. But somebody who's an endurance athlete is going to need that, right? Because you're going to run out of like ability to just use carb. So fats are super important. I mean, I think there's plenty, like for me, I probably get more than most people just because I have so many like nuts and things like that as part of my diet. But yeah, fats are also very flavorful. That's why people taste good. That's why butter tastes good. Fat is flavor. I think my dad told me that. He's like, fat is flavorful. It's like, it's true. Yeah.
Oh, totally.
Like, you know, there's all sorts of, and, you know, you can, the plant-based stuff, with nuts and, other like oils and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. Like I have so many things that, like, when I do a smoothie, it almost always has, unless it's a pre-made shake. If I'm making like my own like protein shake or whatever, it almost always has like a nut butter in it. You know, like almond butter, cashew butter, things like that. Well, first of all, I just think it tastes better. But yeah, you need fats.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally. 100%. So yeah.
Before we wrap up, can you share what programs, what services are you offering right now, and how can people come connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm all over Instagram always, which is how I usually connect with you. On my Instagram page, there is, in my bio, there's quite a few free downloadable PDFs that are the carbs for athletes, how many grams. There's another one on protein. I have another one on, I think that I'll link to on like fueling tips, recovery, post ride stuff that we talked about. I have meal plans coming out and programs. So the meal plans are just literally, here's recipes, here's things that you can do. If you're looking for the protein, you're like, what do I eat? Like, how do I make this simple? And then carbs, like, what are some healthy carbs, like breakfast? So that's on my website. I have courses. I do consults. So if somebody's just like, oh my God, can you just sit down with me and explain this? Like, I do that as well.
Okay.
All of it's on my website, which is darasportspt.com. The meal plans are called Lean Athlete Meal Plans. That's also on my website and my Instagram. I do the consults. I also do like coaching, like monthly stuff for strength training, nutrition, and all that stuff. But I always tell people, like, message me on Instagram and just be like, hey, can you explain this to me or whatever, or do the consult. Like, a lot of times people will start with that, because then I can really explain, I can look at your specific numbers and be like, okay, I need your age, height, weight, workouts. And then I'll kind of just like do all the math for you and explain it. But look at some of the free links too, because it's not complicated stuff. It's a lot of info, but even if you just download one of those PDFs that I have and you just remember, like, oh, Dara said to get in 20 grams of protein after I'll just do a shake after my ride. That's a great place to start.
Yeah.
And you just download the link and you'll see the PDF that I send you. It's easy.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to link those in the show notes as well.
Yes.
Dara, thank you. This is a ton of awesome free information. I super appreciate your time.
It's a lot of info. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. That's a wrap. That was awesome.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed that interview, will you please hit subscribe on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app? We have lots more exciting interviews and tips and tricks coming up. Until next time, happy riding.